Hello Mark, I'm Keisha and my school number is 49. Here's the article. The opinion pages up at Contributor. The Sister's Eulogy for Steve Jobs by Mona Simpson, October 30th, 2011. I grew up as an only child with a single mother because we were poor and because I knew my father had immigrated from Syria. I imagined he looked like Omar Sharif. I hoped he would be rich and kind and would come into our lives and our not yet furnished apartment and help us. Later, after I would met my father, I tried to believe he would change his number and left no forwarding address because he was an idealistic revolutionary, plotting a new world for the Arab people. Even as a feminist, my whole life I've been waiting for a man to love. Who could love me for decades. I was thought that man would be my father. When I was 25, I met that man and he was my brother. By then, I lived in New York, where I was trying to write my first novel. I had a job at a small magazine in an office the size of a closet, with 3 other aspiring writers. When one day a lawyer called me, the middle-class girl from California, who had sold the boats to buy us health insurance, and said his client was rich and famous and was my long-lost brother. The young editors went wild. This was 1985 and we worked at a cutting-edge literary magazine. But I had fallen into the plot of a Dickens novel and really, we all love Love's Best. The lawyer refused to tell me my brother's name and my colleagues starting a betting pool. The leading candidate, John Travolta, I secretly hoped for a literary descendant of Henry James, someone more talented than I, some brilliant without even trying. When I met Steve, he was a guy my age in jeans, Arab or Jewish looking and handsomer than Omar Sharif. We took a long walk, something had happened that we both liked to do. I don't remember much of what we said that first day, only that he felt like someone I picked to be a friend. He explained that he worked in the computers. I didn't know much about computers. I still worked on a manual Olivetti typewriter. I told Steve I recently considered my first purchase of a computer, something called the Coromenco. Steve told me it was a good thing I waited. He said he was making something that was going to be insanely beautiful. I want to tell you a few things I learned from Steve. During 3 distinct periods, over the 27 years I knew him, there are not periods of years, but of states of being. His full life, his illness, his sighing. Steve worked at what he loved. He worked really hard every day. That's incredibly simple but true. He was the opposite of absent-minded. He was never embarrassed about working hard, even if the result was failures. If someone as smart as Steve wasn't ashamed to admit trying, maybe I didn't have to be. When he got kicked out of Apple, things were painful. He told me about a dinner at which 500 Silicon Valley leaders met the then sitting president. Steve hadn't been invited. He was hurt but he still went to work at Next every single day. Novelty was not Steve's highest value, beauty was. For an innovator, Steve was remarkably loyal. If he loved a shirt, he ordered 10 or 100 of them. In the Palo Alto house, there are probably enough black cotton turtlenecks for everyone in this church. He didn't favor trends or gimmicks. He likes people his own age. His philosophy of aesthetics reminds me of a quote that went something like this. Fashion is what seems beautiful now but looks ugly later. Art can be ugly at first but it becomes beautiful later. Steve always aspired to make beautiful later. He was willing to be misunderstood. Uninvited to the ball, he drove the 3rd or 4th iteration of the same black sport car to Next, where he and his team were quietly invading the platform on which Tim Berners-Lee would write the program for the World Wide Web. Steve was like a girl in the amount of time he spent talking about love. Love was his supreme virtue, his god of gods. He tracked and worried about the romantic life of the people working with him. Whenever he saw a man he thought a woman might find dashing, he called out, "Hey, are you single? Do you wanna come to dinner with my sister?" I remember when he phoned the day he met Lauren. "There's this beautiful woman and she's really smart and she has this dog and I'm going to marry her." When Reed was born, he began gushing and never stopped. He was a physical dad with each of his children. He fretted over Lisa's boyfriend and Aries' treble and skirt length and Eve's safety around the horses she adored. None of us who attended Reed's graduation party will ever forget the scene of Reed and Steve slowing dancing. His abiding love for Lauren sustained him. He believed that love happened all the time, everywhere. In that most important way, Steve was never ironic, never cynical, never pessimistic. I tried to learn from that still. Steve had been successful at a young age, and he felt that had isolated him. Most of the choices he made from the time I knew him were designed to dissolve the walls around him. A middle-class boy from Los Altos, he fell in love with a middle-class girl from New Jersey. It was important to both of them to raise Lisa, Reed, Aaron, and Eve as grounded, normal children. Their house didn't intimidate with art or polish. In fact, for many of the first years I knew Steve and Law together, dinner was served on Le Grace, and sometimes consisted of just one vegetable. Lots of that one vegetable, but one, broccoli, in season, simply prepared, with just the right, recently snipped herb. Even as a young millionaire, Steve always picked me up at the airport. He would be standing there in his jeans. When a family member called him at work, his secretary Laneta answered, "Your dad is in a meeting. Would you like me to interrupt him?" When Reed insisted on dressing up as a witch every Halloween, Steve, Lauren, Aaron, and Eve all went weekend. They once embarked on a kitchen remodel. It took years. They cooked on a hot plate in the garage. The Pixar building, under construction during the same period, finished in half the time, and that was it for the Palo Alto house. The bathroom stayed old, but, and this was a crucial distinction, it had been a great house to start with. Steve saw to that. This is not to say that he didn't enjoy his success. He enjoyed his success a lot, just minus a few zeros. He told me how much he loved going to a Palo Alto bike store and gleefully realizing he could afford to buy the best bike there. And he did. Steve was humble. Steve liked to keep learning. Once he told me if he'd grown up differently, he might have become a mathematician. He spoke reverently about college and loved walking around the Stanford campus. In the last year of his life, he studied a book of paintings by Mark Rothko, an artist he hadn't known about before, thinking of what could inspire people on the walls of a future Apple campus. Steve cultivated with me. What other CEO knows the history of English and Chinese tea roses and has a favorite David Austin rose? He had a surprise tucked in all his pockets. I will venture that Lauren will discover treats, songs he loved, a poem he cut out and put in a drawer. Even after 20 years of an exceptionally close marriage, I spoke to him every other day or so. But when I opened the New York Times and saw a feature on the company's patents, I was still surprised and delighted to see a sketch for a perfect staircase. With his 4 children, with his wife, with all of us, Steve had a lot of fun. He treasured happiness. Then Steve became ill and we watched his life compress into a smaller circle. Once he loved walking through Paris. He discovered a small handsome soba shop in Kyoto. He downhill skied gracefully. He cross-country skied clumsily, no more. Eventually even ordinary pleasures, like a good pitch, no longer appealed to him. Yet, what amazed me, and what I learned from his illness, was how much was still left after so much had been taken away. I remember my brother learning to walk again with a chair after his liver transplant. Once a day he would get up on legs that seemed too thin to bear him. arms pitched to the chair back. He would push that chair down the Methodist Hospital corridor toward the nursing station, and then he would sit down on the chair, rest, turn around, and walk back again. He counted his steps and each day pressed a little farther. Lauren got down on her knees and looked into his eyes. "You can do this, Steve," she said. His eyes widened. His lips pressed into each other. He tried. He always tried, and always with love at the core of that effort. He was an intensely emotional man. I realized during that terrifying time that Steve was not enduring the pain for himself. He set destinations. His son reached graduation from high school. His daughter Erin trip to Kyoto. The launching of a boat he was building on which he planned to take his family around the world, and where he hoped he and Lauren would someday retire. Even Yale, his taste, his discrimination, and his judgment held. He went through 67 nurses before finding kindred spirits, and that he completely trusted the three who stayed with him to the end: Tracy, Arturo, Elham. One time when Steve had contracted a tenacious pneumonia, his doctor forbid everything, even ice. We were in a standard ICU unit. Steve, who generally disliked cutting in line or dropping his own name, confessed that this one he would like to be treated a little specially. I told him, "Steve, this is a special treatment." He leaned over to me and said, "I want it to be a little more special." Intubated, when he couldn't talk, he asked for a notepad. He got devices to hold an iPad in the hospital bed. He designed new fluid monitors and X-ray equipment. He withdrew that not quite special enough hospital unit. And every time his wife walked into the room, I watched his smile remake itself on his face. "For the really big things, you have to trust me," he wrote on his sketch pad. He looked up, "You have to." By that he meant that we should disobey the doctors and gave him a piece of ice. None of us know for certain how long we'll be here. On Steve Better's days, even in the last year, he embarked upon projects and elicited promises from his friend at Apple to finish them. Some boat builders in the Netherlands have a gorgeous stainless steel hull ready to be covered with the finishing wood. His 3 daughters remain unmarried. His 2 youngest still girls, and he wanted to walk them down the aisle. He would walk me the day of my wedding. We all, in the end, died in medias res, in the middle of a story of many stories. I suppose it's not quite accurate to call the death of someone who lived with a cancer for years unexpected, but Steve's death was unexpected for us. What I learned from my brother's death was that character is essential. What he was now how he died. Tuesday morning, he called me to ask me to hurry up to Palo Alto. His tone was affectionate, dear, loving, but like someone whose luggage was already strapped in onto the vehicle, who was already on the beginning of his journey, even as he was worried, truly deeply sorry to be leaving us. He started his farewell, and I stopped him. I said, "Wait, I'm coming. I'm in a taxi to the airport. I'll be there. I'm telling you now because I'm afraid you won't make it on time, honey." When I arrived, he and his Lauren were joking together like partners who live and work together every day of their lives. He looked into his children's eyes as if he couldn't unlock his gaze. Until about 2 in the afternoon, his wife could rouse him to talk to his friend from Apple. Then, after a while, it was clear that he would no longer wake to us. His breathing changed. It became severe, deliberate, purposeful. I could feel him counting his steps again, pushing farther than before. That is what I learned. He was working at this too. That didn't happen to Steve. He achieved it. He told me when he was saying goodbye and telling me he was sorry. So sorry we wouldn't be able to be all together as we always planned. That he was going to be a better place. Dr. Fisher gave him a 50 and 50% chance of making it through the night. He made it through the night. Lauren next to him on the bed sometimes jerked up when there was a longer pause between his breaths. She and I looked at each other. Then he would leave a deep breath and begin again. It had to be done. Even now, he had a stern, still handsome profile, the profile of an absolutist, a romantic. His brace indicated an arduous journey, some steep pace, altitude. He seemed to be climbing. But with that will, that work ethic, that strength, there was also sweet stiff capacity for wonderment. The artist believed in the ideal, the still more beautiful later. Steve's final word hours earlier were monosyllables, repeated 3 times. Before embarking, he would look at his sister Patty, then for a long time at his children, then at his life partner Lauren, and then over their shoulders past them. Steve's final words were, "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." Mano Simpson is a novelist and a professor of English at the University of California, Los Angeles. Since 1988, she has held the Sadie Sumulason Levy Chair in Language and Literature at Bard College. She delivered this eulogy for her brother, Steve Jobs, on October 16, 2011, at his memorial service at the Memorial Church of Stanford University. This is the end of the article. Goodbye, Mark.